Well, let's begin this morning by looking at God's Word from the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8, which says this: "The whole commandment that I command you today, you shall be careful to do, that you may live and multiply, and go in and possess the land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers. And you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. And he humbled you and let you hunger, and he fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. Your clothing did not wear out on you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. So you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and by fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks of water, of fountains and springs flowing out in the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron, and out of whose hills you can dig copper. And you shall eat and be full, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes, which I command you this day. Lest when you have eaten and are full and have built good houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, that then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, who led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions and thirsty ground where there was no water, who brought you water out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers did not know, that he might humble you and test you to do you good in the end. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. And if you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today that you shall surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so you shall perish, because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God." This is the word of the Lord. I want to turn your attention back to this verse in that section, Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 5. "Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you." I want to focus today on the word discipline. Discipline. Because that's how he raised his children, the children of Israel. And he compares himself to a father and says that fathers also should discipline their children. And he gives us some examples how he does it. Now, when we hear the word discipline, normally we think of punishment. Or spanking, right? And certainly the Bible does talk about that, right? In the book of Proverbs, folly is bound up in the heart of the child. And folly doesn't mean silliness, it means rebellion. And it's bound in the heart of a child. If you don't believe that, you have not had children, right? And if you don't believe it and want to learn it, join the teachers in the 2-year-old Sunday school room, and you will learn all about rebellion on a small scale. They're not terrorists, you're safe, but you will find out about it. Folly is bound up in the heart of a child, but the rod of discipline drives it from him. The book of Proverbs also says, do not withhold discipline from a child. If you strike him with a rod, he will not die. If you're striking him with a rod so that he dies, you're hitting too hard, right? That's not the idea. There's supposed to be a sting of pain to remind the need to change. And if you withhold that from him, he doesn't learn the importance of change. Finally, whoever spares the rod hates his son. Hates a pretty strong word, but that's what he says. If you withhold the rod, you hate your son, but he who loves him is diligent to discipline him. And there's our word, discipline. Now, those verses are very shocking to today's society because we believe that all violence, any violence, our society believes any violence at all like that is damaging and dangerous to a child. And yet it's very interesting to me that the more we say that and the more we promote that, it seems that also we get a nation that is far more overrun by narcissistic personality disorders. We get a culture of disrespect and dishonor, and far more of a sense of entitlement on the part of children, right? The two things seem to run together, and I just wonder if they might be related, right? I think we need to point out that the rod or spanking is not a be-all and end-all, right? The rod doesn't talk, right? There are other things that have to go with that. I don't even know that it has to be the major part of upbringing to a child. But I think what the scripture is trying to point out is that sometimes it takes more than words. And if you've had boys and girls, you find that with boys, it really very often takes more than words, because the human nature is not as easily tamed as I think our modern society makes it out to be. And I think Scripture is telling us that from the most ancient days. You see, whoever spares the rod, and that's where we get the old saying, spare the rod, spoil the child. I recently read another version of that which says, a hard way to wisdom is better than the soft way to death, which I think is a nice way to put it. It's funny because when we go to the gym or we're working out, we say no pain, no gain, and yet it only seems to apply in the gym, right? When you look at what President Trump is trying to do, he has told the country, look, I know that what I'm doing with tariffs and things is going to raise prices. I know that. It's going to make your life difficult temporarily in the short run. But we've been living the wrong way, and we've got to make some adjustments and fix things and go through some hard times so that we can come out better in the end. And yet, the minute things get a little bit difficult, we complain. Why? Because we don't believe that we should ever have to go through hard times. Anyone who has cancer, right, when you go to have cancer treated, many times it seems that the treatment is worse than the disease itself. The medicine can be far harder on your body than the illness itself, and yet healing often comes as a result of going through those difficult times. Those are just a few illustrations of the fact that sometimes, many times, if you want gain, there has to be pain. And I think that's true when we're raising children as well. Now here's the thing. The rod, although it talks about the rod of discipline, many times, perhaps more times than the rod, the word that's used here for discipline has more to do with instruction and teaching children. So, for example, here in the book of Proverbs, chapter 1, verse 7, a verse that most of us know, and this word actually occurs 3 or 4 times in the opening of the book of Proverbs, that you're supposed to gain instruction. It says, the fear of the Lord's the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. There's our word for discipline, right? So there's an instruction as well that is involved when you're talking about discipline. In the book of Proverbs, chapter 13, poverty and disgrace comes to him who ignores instruction, and that's our word for discipline. But whoever heeds reproof is honored, right? So the way to honor is to be corrected, to be reproved. That's not a pleasant thing. When you're talking about this kind of instruction, it's largely about telling you where you're wrong. Right? And that's what we're going to see here in Jeremiah 17, where God complains about Israel. He said, they did not listen or incline their ear. They stiffened their neck. They got stubborn that they might not hear and receive instruction. God sent the prophets to correct them. They didn't want to take correction. And many times children don't either, because children think they know better. And as we saw last week, children know nothing. They are larvae. They come into the world tabula rasa. They don't know anything. They must be taught. Our species, we must be taught everything, right, from day one. And that responsibility is given to parents. And part of the responsibility of teaching is discipline. Now, there's another word that's often coupled with this word for discipline, and it's the word reproof. Right? It's from an old root. We actually get the word reprobate from it, which means someone who has been put to the test and proved to be false or proved to be wrong. Right? So when we reprove somebody, we're correcting them and telling them they're wrong. None of us like that. We prefer to be right. At least if you're like me. From the time I was a kid, I was certain that the goal in life was to always be right. And even when I was wrong, I argued that I was right. Right? It's just built into the human race. And here it says it in Proverbs 12, verse 1. Whoever loves discipline loves knowledge. That means you want somebody to tell you you're wrong because that's how you learn. But he who hates reproof is, I love this, is stupid. Yeah, Proverbs, Solomon doesn't mince words. If you don't want to be corrected, you're going to end up being stupid. If you always have to be right and think you're always right, that you start off right, that you somehow started off life with all of the information that you would ever need, you're stupid. Because you don't know anything. We all come into the world needing to learn and needing to be corrected. Proverbs 15, verse 32, whoever ignores instruction despises himself, because he's not going to improve. You're not going to get better. You need information coming in from sources better than you on the outside. Whoever ignores that instruction, and that's our word for discipline, despises himself, but he who listens to reproof gains intelligence. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. Discipline is instruction that corrects you when you're wrong, and children need to be told that they are wrong. Otherwise, they can't learn. I want to go back through Deuteronomy chapter 8 and just look at a couple ways that God disciplines his people and the things that are involved in this type of instruction, that it's important for us to keep in mind when we're training children or grandchildren or any children that we come in contact with. Deuteronomy 8 verse 1 says this, the whole commandment that I command you today you shall be careful to do, so that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land that the Lord swore to give to your fathers. Do you notice where God starts in instructing the Israelites? He says, I have positive plans for you. I want to bless you. My whole goal in everything that I've done for you in 40 years is to move you forward and to bring you to this point where you can be blessed. I think it's really important for us. And sometimes as parents, we forget this. I think many parents do not talk enough to their children and explain what they were doing. When we were young and where we had to be corrected, and especially when we needed to be spanked, my dad nearly always would say to us, look, I'm doing this because I love you, right? I think I recall, and I don't remember if I read this somewhere, if my brother Ben actually said this, But I think my dad would say things like, this is going to hurt me worse than it hurts you. And I think at one point my brother Ben said, well, I think you've had enough already, Dad. I think it's important to let children know, like my parents let me know, look, you can't be doing this. Because if you're doing this now, this is what you're going to be like when you're 16 or when you're 20, and you're not going to survive. You have got to get this under control. You've got to get your temper under control. You've got to get your mouth under control. You have got to learn your lesson. And so we would get correction that tried to stop us from what we were doing. That's really important for kids to hear, that you're doing good for them. Give them the full picture of what the world is like. That's how I learned from my parents laying out the things that were going to be forward, and they wanted me to succeed. Now the problem is, I couldn't, and especially when I was very small, I couldn't always put together exactly how my sore backside related to a blessing in the future, right? Because my brain didn't always think that. But eventually you remember. That's why you have to be reminded. Right here, look at what God says. Now this is after Israel has gone through the wilderness for 40 years, and God says in Deuteronomy 8:2, and you shall remember the whole way that the Lord your God has led you these 40 years in the wilderness, that he might humble you, testing to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. It's all a test. I have put you through a test. Yes, your life was difficult. Yes, there were hard things, but look at what it's brought you to. That is why when your child is 5 or 6 or 13 or 14, they might not understand why you are withholding something from them that they want. But when they're 25 and their brain is molded completely, they will come back to you and say, thank you so much. I think every one of my kids has done that. Right? Because they realize, oh my word, the world isn't a bubble like my elementary school or my high school or my college class. The world is a very vicious and difficult place in which I have to survive. And I need to be strong in order to survive, and you made me strong. How do you make a child strong? He humbled you and let you hunger. He let you hunger. He let you experience difficulty and pain. Let you experience some need. Why? Because it builds you up. Right? You can start this with children when they are very, very small. Difficulty, facing obstacles as a child, makes the child stronger. One of the things my wife always did with our children when they were really small, she tried to make sure they got a lot of tummy time. That's what we called it, tummy time. Do they still call it tummy time? You take the baby and put it on his stomach. And it lays there. Well, why are you doing that? Well, the baby's crying. Oh my word, the baby's crying. Well, yes. The baby's frustrated because the baby is on its belly and doesn't want to be. But you know what? The longer it's on its belly, the more it gets used to being on its belly. It learns to walk through the time. And eventually, it figures out, whoop, I can roll over. If you never lay the baby on its belly, it will not learn to roll over. It has to be on its belly. It has to experience the difficulty. And you have a responsibility to put that baby through it. The other night, my son Nathaniel was over, and they have our youngest grandchild, Eloise, and she's coming up on a year old, and she's starting to toddle along, scoot along, and The other children were playing with toys, and they had the lid. We always keep everything in a like Tupperware container. It was a big Tupperware container, and the lid was turned upside down, so it was like hollowed out. And Eloise was kind of scooting, and she came to this, and everybody else was talking. I was watching her there on the floor, and she looked at it, and she put her hand on it, and then she put her hand in it, and then she put her other hand in it, and then she was trying to get her leg up over the side. I mean, it's only like 3 inches high, right? But she worked and worked and worked, and she finally got one leg in, and the other leg's still out, and she's struggling with this. And I thought, should I help her? And I said, no. And I watched her get her other little leg up until she was inside, and she was so pleased with herself to be inside. Then she had to get out. And she went through the whole process again, and she worked to get her body up. Now, you know what? If you interfere with that obstacle and with that difficulty, you weaken the child. They have to go through those kinds of hardships. One of the things that we struggle with here at church, and we have struggled with it for 40 years because it's just something about parents, and I think moms in particular. Moms don't like to put their children in the nursery or the Sunday school. Like, can I sit with my child in the Sunday school? No, you can't. Do you know why? Because you will interfere with the rest of the class. Because your child will not focus on the class, they will focus on you. But if I put my child in, they're going to cry. Yes, they will. If you leave and let the Sunday school teacher deal with it, it'll just be a matter of minutes and they will forget that you existed. Right? Talk to Sunday school teachers. Right? The children get distracted. Now, if your child is inconsolable, you understand we're not cruel. We're not going to, we don't have little Velcro suits that we stick them on the wall and make them cry for the entire hour. We'll come get you. Right? But in general, what happens is a child has to work through the difficulties and get adjusted to the class. If you never let them get adjusted to being away from you, they will never learn to be away from you. Your job is not to keep your child with you when they're 43 in your basement. Your goal is to raise them to become independent and separate from you. Now, they're not going to run away from home when they're 2 months old. Right? I remember my one brother, he did decide to run away from home. I forget how old he was. He might have been 5. And my dad just watched him go. We lived on a farm, and we were out in the middle of nowhere, and he walked down to the end of the driveway, which was a long lane, and he kind of sat down by a tree there and thought, I remember we were looking out the window, my brother's running away. And my dad said, he's not going anywhere. He's 5. And sure enough, sooner or later, he came back. Right? So he had to test the limits. Right? He didn't like something. But he didn't really have a choice. He had to come back and learn his lesson. He had to feel that hunger and then be received back, right? It's just the way your child's not going to die, right? They can handle those kinds of hardship. He humbled you and let you hunger, and then what? Right? You find out that the rod and reproof give them wisdom, right? Let them experience the hardship. Now, do you understand how I'm using rod and reproof? I'm not saying that we're talking necessarily about spanking. I'm talking about hardship. I'm talking about introducing hardship. Sometimes it's just the consequences of your own behavior. Last night, we celebrated my grandson Dexter's birthday. And Dexter, he's all boy. My nickname for him is Bruiser. And he decided he was standing on a little play table, and he was going to jump off. And I said, I don't think, and it was too late. Dexter jumped, His foot did not clear a chair that was sitting at the table, and he went down and smashed his face right into the carpet, and there's blood on the carpet and blood on Dexter, and yeah, it was a great birthday. Well, you know what? Of course he gets up and he's crying and runs to his mom and dad, and they treated him. So what happened? And they got ice and stuff, and they said that you can't jump off tables. Why did you jump off the table? We've told you not to jump off the table. He had to learn through the hardship, and that's how I'm using rod and reproof. He had been told before. He had to learn the lesson by a bloody lip. He might have to learn the lesson with 10 more bloody lips. He's only 3. The rod and reproof give wisdom, but a child left to himself brings his mother to shame. If you don't manage the hardship, and you understand, I'm not saying you just look the other way. I'm saying that there are times like you're intentionally bringing hardship, allowing hardship, managing hardship, teaching the child through hardship and opposition, right? You teach them the resistance. When they go through that strengthens them. If you let them alone to themselves and never instruct them, never comfort, never encourage, never correct, right? If you completely are hands off, that child will bring shame to his mother or her mother, right? Because a child who isn't given direction will have to decide direction on their own. And our world does that a lot, right? Because, children are so wonderfully wise and pure. No, they're not. They're ignorant sinners. They don't know. They need you to teach them. If you don't teach them, they will find their own way. And usually it's a way that seems right to man, but the end of it is death. I would submit to you that that's exactly what we've got going on in a lot of places in our society. Kids raising themselves, kids trying to figure it out all on their own with no direction or input, instruction and correction from their parents, nothing. And so they figure out the wrong way. He humbled you and let you hunger and fed you with manna which you did not know, nor did your fathers know. Now, remember manna? Manna was like this strange little substance. We aren't sure exactly what it is. Do not picture big loaves of bread. Do not picture complete satisfaction where you pat your tummy and say, I'm so full of manna. No, there was just enough to get you through the day, and if you tried to save some for later, it rotted by morning. So what does that tell you? It tells you God did not give excess. He gave what was sufficient. I think sometimes we think our children need to have everything. If I give my children I don't want my child to grow up like I did. I don't want them to have to go without the things that I did. I want them to have everything. I think sometimes you make a mistake. The reason you are the person that you are is probably because you learned to go without things. That's what made you strong. You might be embittered about your time growing up, and you might say, it was so hard growing up, and life was so difficult, and we didn't have enough money, or we didn't have food all these big meals all the time. There was nothing fancy. Christmases were simple. I know our kids laugh, and other kids have laughed at my kids. We have a picture of them at Christmas, of each one of them holding up a bath towel. They each got a bath towel and a washcloth of a different color. And that was like one of their main Christmas gifts, and people were like, that's what your parents got you for Christmas? Well, yeah, not every Christmas was full of great blessing, right? But they loved their stuff, and they learned from that. Those hard times, many of us look back. I look back at Mountain View Chapel when we were up in the Classic building. And if you've ever been up in the Classic building, like in the basement, I have to duck to walk because the ceilings are low, and there's tiny little rooms that were the nursery and the Sunday school room, and the bathrooms are very small, and the building was very small, and we were all crowded in there with noisy air conditioners. And we couldn't wait to get to that big new building with really spacious nursery and nice big bathrooms and a big auditorium and sound systems and all that kind of stuff. I'll tell you what, I love having all of these things, but you know what? I look back fondly at the days when there were 30 or 40 or 100 of us meeting together. Somehow, all of that hardship that went into getting us here was a great blessing, right? We don't need all of the excess. We need what's sufficient. Don't be afraid to just give your child simple things. God did that with the Israelites so that he might make you know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. The instruction that you receive is what gives you life. It's not the stuff. It's not the food. Now, is that verse familiar to you? Do you know anybody who used that verse? In Matthew chapter 4, remember Jesus is out in the wilderness after he's been baptized. It says Jesus was led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. And after fasting for 40 days and 40 nights, he was hungry. Yeah, that's pretty obvious, right? 40 days and 40 nights, all he has is water. He's hungry. And the tempter came to him and said to him, if you're the Son of God, command these stones to become loaves of bread. Is he asking him to sin? There's nothing wrong if he has the power to turn stone into bread. He could do that. There's nothing against that in the law. Is it a sin to eat when you're hungry? No. So tempt here isn't the idea necessarily of tempt to evil, but to test you. And look at what Jesus said. He answered, it is written, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that comes from the mouth of God. I don't have to listen to what Satan says. God is the one that commands me. I am fasting. I've made a choice to fast. I'm going to fast. I am not going to use my power to turn stones into bread. One of the temptations is, well, it's not evil. No, but I am disciplining myself to be obedient only to God's word. And so there is something I have chosen not to do to be in obedience to God, and I'm not going to do that. He had to train himself by the hardship. In fact, the book of Hebrews says that about Jesus. In Hebrews chapter 5, verse 7, it says this, in the days of his flesh, Jesus offered up prayers and supplications with loud cries and tears to him who was able to save him from death, and he was heard because of his reverence. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered. Right? Don't think of Jesus as God with a man suit on. He was 100% God and 100% man. And in experiencing humanity, he experienced difficulty and pain. Right? So when he went through tests and suffering, he experienced those types of things, and he learned to always go back and say, not my will, but thine be done. What does God want from me? And I'm going to endure this. I'm going to go through it to the next step because this is what God wants of me. He learned obedience through what he suffered. That's how you teach children. If you always let them do what they want to do and make them happy, they never learn how to do what they don't want to do. And if you're going to survive as an adult, there are going to be times where you have got to do what you do not want to do. And if you never learned it, you will try to find another way around, or you will just lazily sit back and not accomplish what you need to accomplish. Look at what it says. Although he was a son, he learned obedience through what he suffered, and being made perfect. We use the word perfect to mean flawless, but here it means mature. This is how you mature. Being made mature, whole, he became the source of eternal salvation to all who obey him. We mature by going through suffering and enduring. And we as parents have a responsibility to bring those types of things and allow those types of things to some degree in our children's lives, because that's what's going to make them strong. that you might know that man does not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that comes from the mouth of the Lord. And then he says this, your clothing did not wear out on you, and your foot did not swell these 40 years. That's a funny little thing to tuck in there. How many of them do you think thought of that? Right? They just knew they had, and the word for clothing is not all their clothing, it's their mantle or their coat, the outside, going through windstorms, sandstorms, rainstorms, all the weathering. Their mantles did not wear out, and their foot did not swell, even though they're walking in the hot sand. There's a little blessing that God provided them, and he says, I need to remind you. You didn't even think about this, did you? And sometimes we as parents have to do that, right? How we provided. Oftentimes, kids will say to you, well, you never do anything for me. Right? You never give me anything that I want. Did your kids ever do that? They feel they're treated unfairly. And I always gave the old typical parent answer. Well, you had breakfast this morning, didn't you? And you're going to have lunch and dinner too. There's a roof over your head. You have a bed. You have clothes on your back. I drive you and taxi you everywhere that you need to go. Don't tell me you don't have what you need. I provide for you even when you don't think about all those little blessings. I think that's important for kids to think that way. And kids go, yeah, you just repeat all that typical parent thing. Yes, I do that to remind you, because when you grow up, you're going to realize how hard it is to provide all of those things. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you. So you shall keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways. My son, Proverbs says, do not despise the Lord's discipline or be weary of his reproof. There's our word, discipline. And there's our word, reproof. For the Lord reproves him whom he loves, as a father does the son in whom he delights. When I put up resistance to you as my child, when I make life hard, when I make you face the consequences, I am delighting in you. Because I am making you strong, and someday you're going to stand on your own. Parents, when you've raised your children that way and they stand on their own, isn't that the greatest blessing? One of my greatest blessings is that every one of my kids grew up and they all went out and they got jobs and they married and they have kids and they're like normal people. What a great blessing. They are a delight to my soul. Because they give me rest. That's what Proverbs says. Discipline your son. He will give you rest. He will give delight to your heart. And that's one of the greatest blessings. It's not a matter of being wealthy or a multimillionaire or anything like that. It's simply that their lives are whole and they've stepped up to the plate and they're managing life as a responsible adult. Because that's what I'm trying to do in raising my child. But I have to make life hard for them sometimes and unpleasant, and they don't always see it right away. Know then in your heart that as a man disciplines his son, the Lord your God disciplines you, so you should keep the commandments of the Lord your God by walking in his ways and by fearing him. For the Lord your God is bringing you into a good land, a land of brooks and water, of fountains and springs flowing out in the valleys and the hills, a land of wheat and barley, of vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of olive trees and honey, a land in which you will eat bread without scarcity, in which you will lack nothing, a land whose stones are iron and out of whose hills you can dig copper. Notice they have to do the work. And you shall eat and be full, and you shall bless the Lord your God for the good land he has given you. Remember, after 40 years in a wilderness with almost nothing, you're now ready to find blessing. Take care lest you forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments and his rules and his statutes which I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are full, and have built good houses and live in them, and when your herds and flocks multiply, and your silver and gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, then your heart be lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery, which led you through the great and terrifying wilderness with its fiery serpents and scorpions, and thirsty ground where there was no water, who brought you water out of the flinty rock, who fed you in the wilderness with manna that your fathers didn't know, that he might humble you and test you, to do you good in the end. and now you've had good done to you. He said, don't forget. Beware lest you say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gotten me this wealth. You shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth, that he may confirm his covenant that he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. And if you forget the Lord your God and go after other gods and serve them and worship them, I solemnly warn you today, you shall surely perish. Like the nations that the Lord makes to perish before you, so shall you perish, because you would not obey the voice of the Lord your God. You know what you call that? Entitlement. If you don't discipline your child, one of the things, if you never put him through hardship, if you always meet every need without any difficulty, one of the things they come to is to expect that that is the way life is, and they feel entitled to it. Others are supposed to give it to them. The government is supposed to provide for them. You are owed a life. No, you aren't. No, you aren't. Nobody owes you a job. Nobody owes you income. Nobody owes you a roof over your head. You must go through the hardship of labor and sacrifice to make those things happen. That's what you were supposed to learn from your parents. Parents, if you don't teach your children that, they're not going to learn it. There's another way to become entitled, though. Right? Do you remember when Barack Obama was talking about people who had succeeded, and he said to them that that business you have, you didn't build that. You didn't build that. And as a conservative, I look and say, oh, well, he's cutting down the idea of hard work. And I think he's wrong in that regard. I think he's right in another regard. And that is this: you didn't build life alone. No hermit is in isolation. You are always dependent on something else that was there before you. Right? Always. And you're always interacting with other people. Right? So you need others. Right? And you have to learn that. If you get to the place where you look at yourself as completely self-made and you discount the gifts that were given to you, the help that was given to you, the support that was given to you, what that is going to do to you is give you a sense of entitlement too. And you're going to look and say, all this stuff is mine. My own arm has got me this wealth. That's for me. And you will become a stingy, selfish person, and you will end up isolating yourself from others. Right? And it's not good for man to be alone. So we can make mistakes a number of ways. Right? And we have to be careful about all of those ways. And God warns his people and says, look, this is why I disciplined you. This is why I put you through hardship. This is why I brought you through hardship, and I brought you to blessing, because I want you to grow and bless others. And that's supposed to be a characteristic of us as God's people. So I want to challenge you with that in your lives and dealing with your children and dealing with other people's children. Right? We want to encourage our children to work their way through hardship towards blessing. Let's close in a word of prayer. Father, thank you for the truth. Thank you for this way of life. Thank you that your Son has exemplified it by his obedience during hardship, willing to do whatever he needed to do, even to the point of death for him. Pray that you would help us to live these things out and to build them into the lives of our children. In Jesus' name, amen.